No one realizes what this stuff does. I didn't know as a kid growing up. I would have never known. Mentally, it just kind of ripped me apart.
One thing that I feel very passionate about with the issue of pornography is that pornography consumption does not just develop habits or even addictions. It changes people, and it changes you in ways that will handicap your ability to connect and attach in healthy, loving ways.
He was just 12 when he searched his first adult website, not because he was curious about pleasure, but because no one had ever explained what was happening to his body. His parents never brought it up. His school skimmed over it. His friends, just as clueless. So he turned to the internet, and what he found was not education, it was exploitation. By 17, he wasn't looking at actors anymore. He was looking at kids younger than himself. No one saw it coming. He seemed normal, quiet, polite. But in a world where hormones surge and shame silences curiosity, what starts as confusion can spiral into something far more disturbing. And this isn't an isolated story. So why don't we talk about it? To understand how a generation of boys can go from innocence to impulse and sometimes to offense, we have to take a closer look at the silent failure of our culture to educate them at the moment they need it most. But first, let's talk about how society accidentally set this trap in the first place. Section 1, the myth of the good boy. From a young age, boys are expected to be tough, to keep quiet, to never cry, and never ask questions about their bodies. If they do, they're often met with awkward silence or punishment. Don't say that. Where did you hear that word? Go to your room. Meanwhile, girls often receive the talk. By 10 or 11, parents prepare them for changes, boundaries, even potential dangers. But boys, they're left to figure it out themselves, or worse, absorb whatever the internet and older peers throw their way. And yet, we still believe in the myth of the good boy, that if he's well behaved, he'll somehow just know how to respect others, control his urges, and develop empathy. But biology doesn't work like that. Testosterone begins to spike around age 12. Desire shows up long before understanding does. And if no one teaches these boys what to do with that confusion, something or someone will. And that's where things start to take a darker turn. Section 2, the rise of digital desensitization. In the early 2000s, the average age of first exposure to adult content was around 16. Today, it's closer to 11. Let that sink in. Kids, many not even out of elementary school, are stumbling across violent, unrealistic portrayals of intimacy that warp their perception of relationships before they ever experience one. Worse yet, many of these boys are watching these videos alone, confused, and afraid to ask questions. This isolation creates a dangerous feedback loop. Arousal becomes linked not with connection, but with domination, objectification, and even pain. Over time, these distorted scripts become normalized in the minds of young viewers. They don't know what consent looks like, they don't understand boundaries, but they feel desire and they want to act on it. And sometimes they do, on siblings, on classmates, on children. But before we place blame entirely on screens, we need to rewind even further. Because the real failure didn't start with a click, it started with silence. Section 3, the silence of fathers and mothers. Most parents dread the talk. But what if the problem is that we treat it like a single conversation instead of an ongoing age-appropriate dialogue? Research shows that boys whose parents speak openly and calmly about sex are more likely to delay sexual activity, understand consent, and respect boundaries. But in most households, especially conservative or religious ones, the topic is treated as taboo. Shame replaces guidance. Curiosity becomes rebellion. Some parents believe that talking about sex too early puts ideas in their heads. But here's the truth. The ideas are already there. The body doesn't wait for permission. And when a child's only source of information is a smartphone at 2 a.m., that's not education. That's abandonment. Worse still, many of the boys who go on to harm others were themselves harmed, either physically or emotionally. They never learned that intimacy isn't about control. That touch isn't supposed to be secret, shameful, or scary. And that ignorance, passed down like a family heirloom, becomes generational. But what happens when these boys grow up into men and the damage is already done? Section 4. When boys become offenders. Let's be brutally honest. Most child molesters are not strangers in trench coats. They're often young men, sometimes even teenagers acting out of a dangerous mix of confusion, desire, and learned behavior. In one study, over 35% of sexual offenses against children were committed by juveniles. That's right, kids harming other kids. These aren't always sadistic masterminds. Sometimes they're boys who never learned how to process attraction healthily, who thought what they were doing was okay. By the time they're caught, it's too late for them and their victims. The justice system throws them into detention or adult prison, where true rehabilitation is rare. Society labels them forever. Families are destroyed. Futures vanish, and yet none of it had to happen, which raises a chilling question. Could this have been prevented? Section 5, the opportunity for prevention we keep missing. There are critical windows of opportunity moments when a boy is still forming his sense of right and wrong, still deciding who he wants to be. These are the moments we must not waste. Comprehensive sex education has been proven to reduce risky behavior and increase empathy, especially among boys. Programs that focus not just on anatomy, but on emotional intelligence, consent, and boundaries show dramatic results. And yet, in many U.S. states, such education is either banned, limited, or laughably outdated. Boys are told how to put on a condom, but never how to understand their feelings. They're taught to avoid STDs, but not how to read a partner's body language or say no to pressure. Meanwhile, organizations like Men Can Stop Rape and A Call to Men are working to change the narrative to help young men reframe masculinity as strength through self-control, not dominance. But these programs are still the exception, not the rule, which means the burden of change often falls on the people closest to the child. So, what can we, as individuals and communities, actually do? Section 6, building a culture of accountability and openness. First, we need to normalize these conversations at home, not just once, but often. Parents must learn to be guides, not guards offering safe spaces for boys to ask awkward questions without shame. Second, schools must be empowered to provide modern, age-appropriate sex education that includes emotional development, respect, and empathy, not just biology. Third, we need to remove the stigma around therapy. Boys should be encouraged to talk about their emotions, frustrations, and urges with professionals trained to help them navigate those feelings safely. And finally, the justice system must distinguish between rehabilitation and punishment. A 14-year-old who touches a child inappropriately is not the same as a 40-year-old predator. Both need accountability, but only one still has a chance to be reshaped, because in the end, prevention is not about locking people away after the fact. It's about equipping them with the tools they need before they ever cross that line. Conclusion: the truth is uncomfortable but necessary. When we fail to speak, others will. When we avoid the hard conversations, the internet steps in. When we ignore the early signs, we amplify the consequences. Not every boy will grow up to offend, but every boy will grow up needing to understand himself, his mind, his body, and his power to either harm or heal. If we want fewer victims, we must start by protecting the potential in our sons, not by shielding them from the truth, but by giving them the truth before it's too late. Because the most dangerous predators don't always start as monsters. Sometimes they start as lost boys left alone in the dark, searching for answers no one gave them.